Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be here this morning. My name's Tamara Brahm, and I have the pleasure of facilitating our discussion this morning. A warm welcome to all our participants and to our amazing panel of experts. Thank you to the Herald and the Daily Dispatch for organizing this space of virtual togetherness in a period where there is so much that separates us and keeps us apart. Our realities over the last 18 months have been defined and redefined by the COVID-19 pandemic and the profound impact that this has continued to have on all our lives, on our homes, on our health, on our jobs, on our communities, on our relationships. At the same time, our reality has also been defined by the levels of violence that we experience on a daily basis that we see. And these spaces of connecting with each other, even though it's in a virtual world, are so important, I think, for our collective soul right now. I think if we were in a venue together, I would have said now, let's put our feet on the ground and ground ourselves into the space. Because I think often when we're talking about these issues, they really pierce our hearts. And so we just want to also say to people as we come into the space, let's find our own ways of grounding and coming into the space and being comfortable. I think we meet at a time, once again, we as a country and as a province, as a university community, we've been horrified and deeply saddened by the brutal murder of Nosicela Metabeni. Over the past week, we've seen the outrage, the frustration, the anger of students and other activists and the community as people have voiced their response to this brutal femicide. We also meet within a week of SAPS releasing data for the first quarter of the 2021-2022 financial year, which has painted a grim situation in relation to crime overall and gender-based violence. We have heard that 10,006 people were raped between April and June 2021. We see significant increases in cases of gender-based violence crimes overall relative to the first quarter of 2020 and 2019. So it's in this context within which we are having this critical conversation. We are needing to ask ourselves and each other deep questions that really go to the very core of our society, of who we are as a people. Why is this happening? What are we doing? What do we need to be doing differently? At the same time, we come together to celebrate the 25th birthday of Masimanyane, Women's Rights International. In a period where there is so much darkness in relation to the gender-based violence and femicide scourge, the light that Masimanyane Women's Rights International has continued to shine, the hope that it has given to thousands of survivors, and the difference that it has made to individuals, to families, to communities, to the women's movement can only inspire us. Born out of the lived reality of intimately understanding the experience of violence and abuse personally, seeing how violence can wear women down to the point of not being able to care for their children, and seeing the real gap in services for support to women who want to leave abusive relationships, Dr. Lesley-Ann planted the seed of giving birth to Masimanyane. And over the last 25 years, it has continued to root itself in understanding the lived realities of women, while at the same time taking this lived reality to do work at a national, regional, and global advocacy and policy agenda to make a difference. And so it's really it's really good to have that inspiration to draw from as we have this conversation. It is fitting that Councillor Maya Pakati will provide the opening remarks for this conversation. We welcome you, sir, and appreciate that through your presence here, you are sending out a clear message of political support for the important work that needs to happen and that is happening to respond to gender-based violence. Over to you for our opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Program Director, Ms. Tamara Bram, Executive Director of Masimanyane, Dr. Lesley-Ann Foster, Gender Activist and Head of Maro Foundation, Ms. Pamela Mabini, Women's Rights Law Specialist Advocate Praise Kambula, representatives from the Daily Dispatch and the Herald, participants and viewers of this webinar. It is an honor for me to be officially opening this dialogue held in celebration of the work that Masimanyane Women's Rights International has been doing in the struggle against gender-based violence and femicide over the past 25 years. It is, however, saddening that the patriarchal and extremely violent society we live in has made it essential for organizations such as Masimanyane to continue to exist. We must commend the resilience of the organization and the role that it continues to play in our society. I am particularly inspired by the theme of this dialogue, advancing access to justice, protecting and promoting the rights of women and children in South Africa. This is a theme for a dialogue and reflection, but it is also a call to action aimed at creating the requisite consciousness in our communities about rights of women and children. Sadly, as we are having this dialogue, the environment in our nation is somber, as we are all pained and shocked by the cold-blooded murder of University of Fort Hare Law student, that which you have alluded to, Program Director, Ms. Nosfelo Mthebeni, by her boyfriend. The urgency with which our country must raise the stakes in the emancipation of women is once more being eloquently made, albeit via Mthebeni's chilling murder. The various stakeholders that were present at the 2018 Presidential Summit against gender-based violence and femicide collectively declared that political, government, business, and community leadership and families be held accountable for actions and omissions that are contrary to the achievement of a South Africa that is free from gender-based violence and femicide. This approach correctly makes the fight against gender-based violence our collective responsibility, and we thus should all be accountable for our actions or omissions in that regard. We are here, therefore, to seek dialogue and seek fruitful partnerships that are essential to better the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. The criminal justice system should remain attentive to the scourge of violence against women and children. But the truth is that for the most part, the criminal justice system can only intervene after a woman or a child has been brutalized, at the worst, murdered. The police are neither present at the location where the rape or murder takes place, nor do they promote good behavior. This is a job that belongs elsewhere, a reality that suggests the need for a multifaceted approach in dealing with gender-based violence. As some of the most powerful socializing institutions, the family, the school, the church, as well as the media, have an invaluable role to play. It is high time that children are introduced to the idea of gender equality and related concepts throughout their schooling years. This change would be in line with the declaration of the Presidential Summit Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which states that, and I quote, "The existing education and training system must be evaluated with a view to strengthening prevention initiatives in respect of and responses to gender-based violence and femicide at all levels of the SWAP system," end quote. That being said, figures released by the Gauteng Department of Health last week, which showed that 60% increase in teenage pregnancies, are deeply concerning for obvious reasons. A recent report by the Sowetan indicated that non-governmental organizations in the Eastern Cape are overwhelmed by the rate of teenage pregnancy. As we engage in this dialogue, Program Director, we should always bear in mind that the long walk to women's emancipation is both ideational and practical. But long as it might be, it is worth the undertaking, for society desperately needs it. The fight requires all of us to work together in fighting the scourge of gender-based violence and femicide. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mayor Pakati, for really, highlighting that this is about a call to action, but also that we need to be working collectively to take this agenda forward. And I think that as you refer to the national efforts, I think increasingly we've all recognized the important role that local government has to play in driving this process. So we really appreciate your remarks and your commitment to being part of this process moving forward. So as you were referring to the Presidential Summit and the declaration and the importance of us really looking at how do we prevent gender-based violence from happening in our society. And I think our discussion today really, we're focusing, as you said, on access to justice. We're focusing on justice in the widest sense, because it's a deep injustice that women are being killed, are being raped, are experiencing the levels of violence that we are in the country. So I think that the way we're wanting to have this discussion is really to delve really deeply into what is causing, what are the drivers of the levels of gender-based violence that we're seeing in the country, what have been some of the responses, both by government and by civil society, and what is it that we need to be doing differently? How do we make sure that we accelerate and we amplify efforts to respond? And for us to do that, we have really, I just want to welcome our panel. And we have a panel of 4 people that bring incredible expertise, experience to this discussion. I'll introduce each of our panelists more individually as I pull them into the discussion. But just to say that we have a panel of four colleagues. And I want to start off with Pamela Mabini, who is a gender rights activist and who will be helping for us to understand the context within which we're having this discussion. Then I want to also invite and welcome Professor Phumla Qola, who we know very well for her work and her passion and her contribution to this field. We're excited to hear her insights and for her, to share her experience in this conversation. And then we have Advocate Praise Kambula, who's played a really key role, within the national processes around the Presidential Summit, but also the legislative process, and has a very keen sense of the justice issues. And then lastly, we also want to really warmly welcome Dr. Lesley-Ann Foster, the Executive Director of Masimanyane. And we're really pleased to have you here because I think you bring together a number of us of us into this conversation as we've crossed paths over many years, the history, both at the local community level, at the policy level, at the conceptual level. So welcome to a wonderful panel, and we really look forward to having our conversation. So we're going to move into the first part, and this is one conversation. We've just kind of broken it up a little bit so that we can delve a little bit deeper. So as I was saying, Pamela Mabini is a social and gender activist. She runs a foundation called Maro Foundation, and that foundation has been focused on working with young girls, supplying them with sanitary towels. But I think very importantly for this conversation, Pamela provides and continues to provide support to women who are sexually abused, walks with them through the painful process of accessing justice, and accompanies them to attend court cases. And so she comes into the conversation really to assist us to better understand the context within which we're having a conversation on justice. And so, Pamela, to kick off our conversation, can you tell us a little bit about the drivers of gender-based violence in the communities that you're working in? So we want you to talk to us, give us a bit of a description of what we're actually talking about. And then we want you to talk to us based on your experience. What are some of the challenges that women face in accessing justice, and what have some of the interventions been to respond to that? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tamara. And my greetings to my colleagues as well, the panel and the viewers out there. To be quite honest with you, the challenge is what drives the level of the gender-based violence in our country. First of all, it's the alcohol and drug substance abuse, lack of employment, and in some cases, it's the absent fathers. You know, being a boy child raised without a father, it's got a lot of impact. And also associating associating themselves with peers who condone violence. That's another thing that drives the level of abuse, and being abused as a child as well, because it affects you mentally, and they will always think that it's the right thing to do. And also witnessing a marital abuse, when you're growing up and seeing that your father is abusing maybe your mother or one of your families, and then you'll think that also it's a right thing. And another thing that also that when I was doing my ground check with the communities, I work with the community, is the ritual cult. These youngsters and these people, they tend to want a shortcut. They are lazy to take a normal route in terms of being having money, because they think that when they join this ritual cult, because there's always instructions that are being given there for them to be wealthy or to have money. So those are the main issues and main problems that we are focusing on. And also, where it says that why do we seem to be fighting a losing battle? It's because we are being failed by justice and law enforcement. Especially, you will find that most of victims, they are scared to go to the police station and report the cases or the incidents, because our police officers are not equipped well, they are not trained. They need to be, we need police officers that are well trained to deal with such cases of gender-based violence, sexual abuse, and all that stuff. Because you'll find that most of the women, they go to police station to report the incidents. But then when they get there, they are being laughing stocks. They are being blamed by the police officers where they are supposed to be, to feel safe and being protected by them. And then also, another thing that I've noticed, when we go to court, when the victims go to court as witnesses for their cases, they are being failed by the justice as well, in a way that the defense lawyers of the perpetrators, the way they question them and they put the pressure of putting the blame to them for the incident that has happened to them. Those are the issues that we mainly focusing, the questioning. I mean, there are sensitive issues, sensitive questions that they will ask them. I mean, here you are a victim. You are being you're being sexually abused. By then the questions, for instance, the case that we're busy with, of a pastor that has been sexually abused a lot of girls. I mean, how do you ask such questions that we've been complaining about, that how you can't ask if you did enjoy, how many inches, that those are sensitive questions that a defense lawyer the defense lawyer has to ask. And then also another thing, we need government to intervene to protect the victims when the case is still on, and for being not safe as witnesses, and also we lack of humanity. That's another thing. We lack of humanity. We tend to forget easily, especially when there's a case, a high case where you'll see that the people are making a noise, and on social media and everyone is concerned about that case, is focusing on that case. People focus on that, and then a few days after, we tend to forget. Whereas we need role models. We need men, not that we lack of role models. We need men that can take these boys under their wing and teach them how to behave as a man, how to treat a woman, how to protect these young girls, and so that they can feel safe, so that we can become a better community. We become a better, in future, we raise kids that are going to have a bright future and feel safe and protected when they are around any gender. Whether you are with the boys or men, we as women, we need to feel safe. And you can't be blamed for wearing whatever that you are wearing, and then you find that there's people that will tell you that you invited the rape to happen to yourself. It doesn't work like that. So those are the issues that I've been experiencing, and we need to work together. We don't need to focus on the gender-based violence when it's the Women's Month, or when it's the 16 days of activism. We're supposed to be consistently focusing on a gender-based violence, and it's something that we need to work on it. Having a drive, road shows, teach our schools, our kids at schools, at home, in our community, for us to equip and being a better community. Thank you so much, Tam.
Thank you so much, Pamela, for sharing, your experience and your insights around why we are where we are at the moment. And I think you raise a number of really critical issues. You raised the economic issues. You've raised the issue of intergenerational violence and how witnessing violence then results in further violence. And you raise the issue of the importance of social norms, right? And finding new ways of looking at what it means to be a man, what it means, etc. I also think you've raised a number of challenges which our subsequent speakers will build onto and take up in relation to the criminal justice system, and how that system further victimizes victims as they pass through the system. So thank you very much, for setting the scene for us in that way. And that takes us very well to our second speaker, which is Prof. Phumla Ngola. And she is going to, we know your work. We know that you've delved deeply into understanding rape, into understanding gender-based violence in our country. And so we're very keen to hear how you help us make sense of where we are at the moment. Prof is the director for the Center for Women and Gender Studies at NMMU, and she holds a Doctor of Philosophy. And what struck me as I read your bio was really the degree to which you've grappled with structural violence and the linkages between decoloniality and violence. So a really deep lens of helping us to understand where we are at the moment. I think you're very well known for your book on rape, A South African Nightmare. And so I think as we move into this next section of our conversation, we really want to ask you to help us to make sense of what's happening at the moment, the levels of rape, the levels of femicide. And we also want to ask you to share your experience as an academic and what some of, because we know our young women are particularly vulnerable to femicide and to rape. And so we also want to hear a little bit about what the response has been within the universities and what needs to be done differently. You know, what is it based on this analysis of society and of the universities? What do we need to be doing differently? Over to you, Phumla. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamara, and thank you to the colleagues who are hosting us at Daily Dispatch and the Herald. And of course, I think we cannot say it enough that we also celebrating 25 years of Masimanyane. So I think that speaking after Pamela is probably a good thing, because then she's already covered certain things that I can then just build on rather than having to, so I'm not going to repeat what she said that I agree with, but I will then try to perhaps tease some of that. I think that listening to Pamela, and also from our own experience, from research, from the work that organizations on the ground have done extensively in this area, we now have overwhelming evidence of violence in our society, of violence as a foundational problem in South African society, historically and well into the moment. In fact, often in some of my work, I often speak about the ways in which violence and how automatic our retreat to violence, our reaching for violence as ways of engaging, it makes violence in South African society almost seem as though it's one of our vernaculars. It's a very kind of key way in which we communicate and accord value and reorder the society. And this, of course, is a big problem. And so it's important to think about gender-based violence, violence against women, violence against sexual minorities as part of occupying for us as South Africans or Southern Africans, a space that is already constituted in very violent ways, right? So we do not enter then, it's not as though we're in a society that's otherwise peaceful and then has this mysterious high levels of violence against women, high levels of gender-based violence. We're living in a society where violence is so normalized. And in fact, the research shows that all forms of violence, across the board, we rank quite high on different kinds of levels of violence, and all crisis levels of gender-based violence within that. We also, of course, know that, and this is important for what I'm going to say, this laying of this context. We also know, of course, that sexual and other gender violence are a problem across the world, right? So we're not alone. We're also at a time where globally we're starting to see trends where gender-based violence specifically is becoming more brazen, right? It's being contested in increasingly public ways for, again, across the world. But we're also seeing the ways in which gender-based violence and the contempt for women and the contempt for queers is taking on quite a bold face across the world. And so in both large stages at kind of presidential levels in different countries, and so on, but also in the hidden ways that perhaps have become, again, less hidden as the whole world battles COVID, because we're seeing there, again, as people retreat into lockdowns, we're starting to be reminded of things that we should know. And perhaps everybody on the panel knows some of these things. But it's been very interesting to track across the world the ways in which women's rights activists are talking about how COVID has highlighted many of the lessons we know about where gender-based violence occurs. And of course, as all people in the lockdowns are being entreated to stay home, to be safe, right? This has kind of reminded, and that being accompanied by increasing levels of reporting gender-based violence of different kinds, reminds us again of the importance of problematizing the relationship between home and safety, right? That we've long known that home, telling women to go back home, does not in fact push them into safety. That home is a very problematic space, is often a violent space for many women. However, having said all of that, having spoken about the larger context, I think it's important that we not stop there. Because I think often if we only focus on, oh my goodness, it's global and it's historical, it makes us feel a little bit as though our work doesn't make any difference and cannot make any difference in the world. I think the context is important, but I think we can't stop there. I think it's important to continue to think about systematic ways to deal with violence, especially violence against women. And I want to propose what some of those systematic interventions need to be, because I think it's important, and all of us in different capacities have been involved in kind of specific victim support work in different parts of our own trajectories, the panelists. And so obviously there is enormous value there. But I think that for many of us on this panel and our sisters and comrades elsewhere, colleagues elsewhere, it's also important to think about the systematic ways, because I think that while victim support is important, while victim-led interventions are important at an individual and small level, we are very clear at this point that we need to make some fundamental, or continue to make some fundamental systematic changes. So we need to then be thinking about a combination of the individual and the systematic approaches. I think there's significant shifts. So we're not exactly where we were 20 years ago. There have been some successes. But I think even as we reflect on our successes, it's important to remember that our work has been impactful. So we see a much more vibrant, dynamic, I think, public discussion and pushback against gender-based violence in our country. And that didn't create itself, right? It has not happened automatically. It is partly a success of how people who've worked in this field, feminists who've worked in this field in different organizations in different parts of society, have continued to push to put this issue on the table. And so perhaps we have a society that is able to speak more frequently and more interestingly about it. That's one of the successes. I think my colleagues, Praise, will talk more specifically about kind of more structural ways in which we can track that change. But I think it's important to I think often as people who do anti-gender-based violence work, anti-rape work, we're very queasy about admitting that we've had, even though we still have a long way to go, that the 25 years, the 30 years, the 15 years, the 10 years actually have been impactful. And I think that's an important point to. But I think also we have to recognize, as part of recognizing our successes, to recognize that patriarchy and the specific ways in which patriarchy expresses itself in South Africa is also shifting, right? So while we can see, people are speaking the language and against gender-based violence more openly today, more frequently, more publicly than they did 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, or or 30 years ago. It's also important that patriarchy has not been sitting still, right? So we're also seeing that is also adapting. So the strategies of pushing back against the gains of gender-based violence and the work of anti-gender-based violence activists has also been mutating. We're seeing new strategies there. And so even when we're saying, there are still limitations, there's far to go, it's important to recognize that part of that is because the responses to our work have also shifted. So let me talk then a little bit about university campuses, and I think what we're getting right and what we're getting terribly wrong, and where we might actually want to go. I think it's not enough, as I thought, for universities and all higher education. I'm going to say universities, but some of this can be extracted across higher education and some of it across education. So I'm just going to say universities because it's quicker to say university or all higher education and TVET and post-school. It's not enough to say that we're part of universities are part of society and therefore share the experiences of rape, sexual harassment, and predatory behavior. In fact, we need to be doing the work of thinking what it looks like to create, first of all, safe campuses. So we spent a lot of time since the early 90s talking about transforming institutional culture. But there's very little thinking about, there's very, very direct translation of what it means to translate, to shift institutional culture away from ones that engender, that facilitate, and that in fact enable gender-based violence to continue to be a norm. So what does it mean exactly? I think we need to kind of return to that and kind of stick with that sense, with the connection between how to create safe campuses and to create the kind of institutional cultures that are in fact around safe campuses, because campuses are very unsafe currently. They're unsafe. We're seeing frightening levels of gender-based violence of all kinds that are exploding. And perhaps because reporting is being made easier, we're seeing that spike too. But certainly, I think the numbers are a reliable indicator of just how dangerous university campuses are for students across the board. But universities are also universities occupy a very special part in our society, right? We transform when we're not thinking about gender, and I think we need to bring this into how we think about gender. We take people who are children, right? Late teens, and by the time they leave our universities, if they're successful and we don't lose them in the process, we claim to have transformed them into people who are able to be functional members of society in a variety of ways. And yet we abdicate our responsibility when this comes to gender. What are the opportunities in how universities do their work to actively produce the kind of citizens who think about gender in radically different ways? So one of the challenges, of course, is going to be one of the challenges that the university sectors need to take on is to think about the ways in which we can transform the ideas and the norms of gender that our students come in with. And I'm not saying that they all come in with problematic ones, but in the process of producing kind of citizens of a certain kind, we can also make a huge impact. If you think about how hundreds of thousands of people go through universities, and if the gender scripts that we are teaching, that we are inculcating, are progressive and freeing ones, what impact will that have in the society we're trying to build? So thinking about that role, also understanding that universities themselves enable violence in very specific ways and are deeply implicated in. So it's not an accident that so much violence is at universities. And of course, occasionally, as we've said today, Nosicelo, Tebeni, several other students whose names we know, but very often we don't know the students' names, right? Because not every case. So it is a systematic problem that we need to think about in the very. I'm wrapping up. In the very thinking of how universities work and how gender is made, how the meanings of gender and performance and what scripts are made available to our students. I think currently what we do mostly at universities is try to tighten our policies. We try to tighten reporting and investigation and all of those things. And I think that's very important. But I think part of why we have limited success with our policies and with our reporting and with our processes is because we treat that as an isolated case. We miss the opportunity that that having access to thousands of young people daily offers us to shift gender performances. And I think, and here I'm just going to end then on kind of making linkages with some of the lessons we can learn from Masimanyane's 25-year work in universities as elsewhere. The importance of continuing to make connections across different strata. What we know is illustrated when we work in different spaces. And so Masimanyane's capacity to work across different classes of women, different rural, urban, because often a lot of our research focuses so much on urban and kind of pathologizes kind of rurally located women, to think about the ways in which insights from one space can translate well into another state, and to think about the institutionality. And I think finally, the examples that Pamela has given show us that the drivers are these normalized patterns of gender that are problematic in various ways. And I think then, and all of the things that she mentioned, people being socialized into gender-based violence as the norm, witnessing it constantly. And that is part of what we need to interrupt. And we need to think about, well, how do we, on a mass scale, what resources do we have institutionally that are able to break the likelihood of children being exposed, let's say, exposed to these scripts repeatedly. And of course, I think education needs to come to the board here. I think education institutions across the board, from the beginning to the very end. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much, Pumla. It was very difficult for me to ask you to stop. That was such a useful input. Thank you also for reminding us that we have come a long way. As much as we're sitting with the challenges, we are where we are as well because of where we've come from. So I think that was a very important reminder, and also a reminder of some really useful ideas of how we really need to look at both the individual but the systemic issues in our response. And your call for using universities as spaces to transform, for people to come out of there with a new transformative approach to gender issues is so inspiring, as well as the call to build safe campuses and the intersectionality that you raise in your closing remarks around Masimanyane. So thank you so much. We are going to come back, hopefully, to these issues in the discussion. I just want to make sure we have enough time for the discussion. We also want to encourage people to raise questions and comments that we'll take up in the discussion. We've had a few comments congratulating Masimanyane, over its long history and contribution at different levels. The importance, as we go into our next speaker, of recognizing the issue of victim blaming and secondary victimization within the justice system. And there was also a question, and I'm saying it even before I'm introducing the next speaker, because we're going to move now from more grappling with understanding the issue to looking at what has been the response to the issue, right? Both at the level of government and the criminal justice system, and more broadly, as well as wider societal level. And so one of the questions that has emerged so far for Advocate Praise as she comes in as well is the issue of victims withdrawing cases. So I'm just parking that as well for your consideration there. And I think we want to move, and I think Masimanyane celebrates its 25 years, and so does our Constitution. So we're also celebrating 25 years of our Constitution, and so we want to use that as the foundation really to go into our next presentation, which Advocate Praise Kambula is going to do, is the head of promotion of rights of vulnerable groups in the Department of Justice and constitutional development. She has been playing a key role in driving the change agenda in relation to GBV in the country. And has also, and I just want to say this as well, has also continued to play a key role in working with civil society, right? Through, for example, the National Strategic Plan Implementation Collaborative, creating spaces to look at how do we respond and how do we strengthen justice in this country. So we're going to call on you, Praise, to come in now and to talk to us a little bit about what has been done to strengthen access to justice and to build accountability in our response to gender-based violence and femicide in the country, but also what are some of the gaps and challenges that we need to be looking at moving forward. Over to you.
Thank you, Tammy, and thanks to the host and the organizers for inviting us in this event, and congratulations to Masimanyane for their 25th anniversary that coincide with the 25th anniversary for our Constitution. First, for me, I think that the premise that I would like to move from is that, a gender-based violence and femicide is rooted in patriarchal social norms, gender inequalities, socio-economical inequalities, the family dysfunctions, the low social value that we sometimes, if not most of the time, attach to the female population, that is women and girls, as well as the lack of accountability. But if you look at all of these and some that have been mentioned, substance abuse, racial cult, and so on, but some of these core drivers cannot be addressed by law. We cannot have a piece of legislation that criminalizes a thought, an attitude, because legislation is mostly about dealing with a commission or an omission. So it's about the end result of a thought. So now moving to our presidential summit declaration, as it has been mentioned, that it has Article 1 and Article 2. Article 1 says that political, government, business, and community leadership take responsibility and support the cause of eradicating gender-based violence and femicide. And if you go to Article 2, then it says that political, government, business, and community leaders, and then adds families, be held accountable for actions and omissions that are contrary to the achievement of a South Africa that is free from gender-based violence and femicide, and as it moves. But all of this, if you look at these two articles, they are talking about accountability. And that accountability, it starts from a family setup. So because before we had law, we had a family first. And before we had a community, we had a set of individuals building a family. And before we had a society, which is a combination of a group of communities, there was an individual that united with another to build a family. So if we don't focus on the accountability of families, we're going to miss it. We're going to lose that. So we need to start then from the premise of the presidential summit declaration, which takes the tone of accountability and starting from individual level, moving into the community and to the society as a whole. So what it tells us then, it says that be accountable, be a change agent for the country. What do I mean by that is that we need to challenge then our thoughts. We need to be involved. We need to empower ourselves. We need to act against patriarchy. We need to instill gender parity in parenting. We need to rehabilitate our families so as to maintain good, or to restore, the good values of love, of peace, of unity, of respect, and so on. And we need to be the champions for a GBV-free society. And that really needs us then to do the role modeling and join in the sisterhood. All right. So those are the issues that we need to look into as South Africans. Now, look at what then in this month, because we're celebrating the International Women's Month, and UN came up then with this global theme, which is then it provides two thematic statements. One, generation equality, realizing women's rights. And then embedded in it, then it's a global campaign that says that hashtag choose to challenge. And what it says is that then we need to take accountability, and that accountability needs to start with us women, because if you want to have a change in your own space as a woman, you need to be involved, and you need to make a change. You need to create something. You need to work on how you are parenting your girl child and also your boy child, and how to relate then to your husband and your pastor and your partner and so on. Now, as I move then very fast then to what I have been tasked to do is to say that first, we have been having, and in 2018, women taking to the streets and saying that the criminal justice system is not favoring us. The criminal justice system is taking them out, and the criminal justice system is not victim-centric, and so on. And looking into that now, I would like all of us then to look into the Constitution, because before we can have any piece of legislation that one has even spoke about the law of evidence, the Criminal Procedure Act, that is how the criminal proceedings then are conducted in our court. Everything then is centered around the Constitution, governed by the Constitution, and it has to pass the test of the Constitution. But if you look at this Constitution, it has a provision that talks about gender equality. That is Section 9, that says that every person has a right, if I can read it very quickly, it says that then every person, everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of law. All right. And also then we also have then a Section 12 that talks to freedom and security of persons, that says that everyone has a right to freedom and security of persons, which include the right to be free from all forms of violence from either the public or a private source. So what it means is that as women, we have a right to be protected from any form of violence. And we also have a right to life. So we should not be having an incident of femicide. The same Constitution has Section 35. And Section 35, then, it's a provision that gives dedicated rights to the arrested. And let me quickly go to it. To the arrested, the detained, and the accused persons. All right. So what it means then is that we have a Constitution that protects the arrested. It protects the detained when they are in prison. They are holding their rights. It protects the accused person when that person appears now in court. And same Constitution is mum on the rights of the victims. So it creates an imbalance, which is quite a serious imbalance. And whenever there is an imbalance in any situation, the results will be the production of unfairness. And that's what we are seeing, because we see women saying, and everybody saying that should not receive bail But Section 35 says that this accused person has a right to remain silent, has the right to be released on bail, has a right to legal representation, has the right to fair trial. So as the magistrate is sitting there and the presiding officer is looking at the Criminal Procedure Act, is looking at the law of evidence and any other piece of legislation that must bow to the Constitution. So, and the accused is holding the supreme law of the country, that any other piece of legislation that is passed by Parliament must bow to the Constitution, meaning that it must pass the constitutionality test. So what it means is that for as long as we have this huge lacuna in our Constitution, we are still going to be seeing them roaming the streets after they have killed us. We're going to still continue paying for them for the legal representation. We are still going to be feeding them when they are in prison. We are still going to ensure that there's a fair trial for them. But there is nothing in the Constitution that talks about the fair trial for the victim of crime. So this is one thing that we need to look at as women. And for as long as it is there, we are still going to be seeing this unfairness and imbalance that we are experiencing. And what is it as a country that we have done to try to close that gap? We came up with the Victims Charter, the Service Charter for the victims of crime. And it's of course, it's an encapsulation of 7 rights that are drawn from the Constitution. But you cannot use a charter because a charter is toothless. A charter is not enforceable. So it is not in the same part with the Constitution. So we cannot correct it with the charter. We cannot correct it with any piece of legislation. It has to be corrected in the Constitution. Now, coming then to what I have been invited here to talk about, the 3 bills that we have been talking about that are as a result of the march in 2018 that was saying that we are demanding that the piece of the legislation that we have as a country, it needs to be victim-centric, it needs to speak for the victims and so on. And we are a country that quickly goes to amending legislation all the time, because when we look at everything when we look at the exponential rise of crime, then we will think that the problem is with the law. And the problem is not with the law all the time. The problem is with the family unit. It's about accountability. So what we have done now with these 3 bills is to inculcate in them, the culture of accountability. So if you look at the Domestic Violence Act, it talks about it already, that is the principal act. It says that any person who has a material interest in the well-being of the complainant may apply for a protection order on behalf of the complainant. Then what it says is that then every person, the neighbor, the sister, the brother, the mother, has the responsibility of ending domestic violence by going into court to make an application on behalf of the victim. And it goes on to say that any person may apply for a protection order on behalf of a child. So me as the neighbor, if I see that there's somebody there's a child who's being abused, I may apply for a protection order. It goes on to say that not more than 3 persons may attend the proceedings to provide the support to the complainant. So what it means is that because most of the victims do not want to go to court, all right, to engage with the court system, they are thinking of is the fear of the unknown, is ambivalence, is the fear of humiliation, fear of embarrassment, the fear of further retaliation, and so on. But the act then, understanding what is in the mind of the victim, then it says that as a friend, you can go to court and give support. As the victim is testifying, you are there, you are holding the hand. It says that the brother, you can do the same thing, and so on. And these are the issues then that are already in the act. And it also says that no prosecutor may withdraw a charge of violation of protection order without being authorized to do so. So what it means is that we should not be having an incident of high withdrawals and so on. So now coming into the amendment bill, moving very fast, now we have tightened the already existing principles of accountability. But now to say that now functionaries, you have an obligation to report domestic violence. We're saying that no more bystanderism in domestic violence matters. Another person has an obligation to report domestic violence committed against a child, a person with disabilities, an older person, and so on. And we have extended that obligation now also to the electronic communication service providers to say that then you have a responsibility to furnish information to court as to who sent this SMS, who sent this video, and so on, so as to be able to bring accountability to every person who is living in South Africa in terms of the Presidential Summit Declaration. We also say now we have a clause now that says that legal aid services must be offered then to the complainants so that they don't stand there and unrepresented and deal and participate in proceedings where then you have a legal representative. And now moving further, we have also included a clause that says that let there be the directives for the clerks of the court so as to eliminate the incident of secondary victimization, which must have adequate disciplinary measures against non-compliance. And for as long as I am in the department, that we will ensure that we are dealing with it. We will be instituting those disciplinary actions against everyone who is behind the counter, who is insensitive to the victim. Because the moment you get insensitive to that victim, it took guts for her to come to the system. So now we will be chasing her back into the cycle of violence where she might die. And then those directives then, as we are saying, there's a clause that says that there should be for the Department of Health, for social development, for basic education, for higher education, for science and innovation and communication and digital technologies, so that then we have a bigger spectrum of departments that take responsibility to end gender-based violence and femicide. Now,
Advocate,
okay.
I have to come in because I know there's so much to say. Your input has been so incredibly rich, but I think there are some questions, and we do want to have enough time in this space for people to engage. So I'm going to ask you to keep some of your closing comments, when we end, and also, to use that time to raise some of the other issues. But thank you so much, and especially for highlighting the issue of accountability, foregrounding it, and also some of the challenges around the Constitution and some of the gaps that we need to be looking at. So thank you so much for that. I do want us to move on quickly to Dr. Lesley-Ann Foster. And Lesley-Ann, I don't think I need to give a big introduction to you. I think we've been talking about you and about Masimanyane throughout. So over to you, Lesley-Ann, to reflect a little bit on some of the, responses Masimanyane has been taking historically and currently to the crisis we find ourselves in. Thank you, Lesley-Ann.
Thank you. I just want to start by thanking all the panelists and particularly, picking up on all these critical issues that we're grappling with. I thank every one of you to be here, which is the celebration of Masimanyane's 25th anniversary. It's been a tremendous, wonderful journey. Masimanyane started off as Masimanyane Women's Support Center. We were the first facility in the Eastern Cape that looked specifically at addressing violence against women and girl children. We based our organizational principles on the three principles of the CEDAW Convention, which is non-discrimination, state accountability, and equality, substantive equality. So that has always been a thread throughout the organization. But when we started, we didn't know all of these things. What happened was that we were exposed to international law very early on in our existence. And we came to understand violence against women both as a human rights issue and the links between violence against women, and women's discrimination and oppression. And that was really, really powerful. Some of the things that we've achieved is not just the conceptual clarity, which informed our analysis and our responses, but we were the first organization post-1994 to engage with the UN around women's issues. We submitted an alternative report to the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is the CEDAW Convention, in 1997, 1998. And that shadow report focused solely on gender-based violence and showed how it interacted with politics, economics, social and technological issues. And what was interesting about it when I reflect on it 25 years later is that we were applying an intersectional lens before it became fashionable to do that. And that set the organization apart in many ways. In our early history, we were also appointed by the Minister of Justice to form part of the team that developed the Domestic Violence Act of 1998. Rashida Manjoo, Matsilo Motsai, and various other people were part of that. And that was just after we made our first visit to the United Nations. So we came back armed, with the knowledge of how to address these issues, from a global perspective. And the preamble to that, the Domestic Violence Act actually has the CEDAW Convention preamble in it as well. We've worked as Masimanyane across 55 countries. I must say that because I'm very proud of that. We worked in the Middle East and North Africa. We've been in Iraq, we've been in Kuwait, we've been in Turkey. We've trained people on the use of the CEDAW Convention across all of these countries, Togo, Benin, I can't even think of all of them. And that's been remarkable work. Many of those organizations have come to East London and worked with us here. We currently have a very strong regional program led mainly by young women. And we're working across 15 countries in Africa. But we've also initiated in 2012 the International Network on Violence Against Women, and it is driven here from East London. We're working on 5 continents. Because we work virtually, our secretariat is located in Malaysia, in some of the African countries and so forth. So, but it's all driven from Masimanyane. So for me, those kinds of connections are very important. But Masimanyane's real focus has been on local communities. We have a very strong footing and grounding in remote rural areas. We have teams of women that go out and do this work. And so we see ourselves as a locally rooted organization, which is globally connected. And what we've done over our 25 years is brought what we've learned in the international community right down to the local level, because we have argued that unless international law can change a woman's life in the rural community, it actually means nothing. And the way in which we do this is not relying on the goodwill of men, but working to develop women's agency, showing women what their power is as rights holders, getting them to engage politically. And the young women we're working with now across all of these countries, including South Africa, and we saw that in the march that we had for Nositlelo's murder recently, is that the young women have developed such great agency, and it was wonderful to see that. So our real focus is also on facilitating learning around our constitution and what the provisions are, the protocols, treaties, and mechanisms that support initiatives to end impunity and increase access to justice and advance gender equality. Masimanyane held the first Violence Against Women Tribunal in our City Hall, Mayor Pakati, and we had some key people there. Cheryl Carolus was one of the judges, and so was Judge Navi Pillay, before she became the judge that she is renowned for today, but she remembers that very well. So there were a number of firsts that the organization was responsible for, and we are very proud for that. We are also very conceptually clear about what discrimination is, about what inequality is, and as Prof. Gola spoke about it earlier, how that inequality was exacerbated and surfaced so visibly during COVID, and we've written about that. So we've had a lot of successes in that field. But over the 25 years, we've been part of and witnessed various trends in addressing gender-based violence. We don't really use the term gender-based violence because we believe that violence against women is the correct political term to use. What's happened with the term gender-based violence is it has reduced this scourge against women to a zero-sum game. And we start to hear about, yes, but, men are also abused and all of that sort of thing. So for us, the politically correct term is violence against women. So I'm going to use that. We understand how patriarchy plays out in the lives of women through the experiences we have of working with women on a daily basis. The role we now play is linking not just the local to the global, but also to the regional. We work to build knowledge and capacity with a strong focus on marginalized groups, particularly rural women's groups. Our work has been integral to the changes that you see today. As Prof. Gola said, what we're seeing today is the work of 25 years, in my opinion, and longer for other women. I mean, yesterday I did a presentation on Charlotte Matlege, and she was an activist in the early days, working for gender equality. There's been so many, Lillian Ngoyi, Ruth First, and in the new wave, we've got Mavive Mayaka Manzini, Tenjiwe Mtinso, women like that. They've really pushed the envelope, and we're only building on that. So what we are today is the build up of all of that. So Masimanyane is still integral to the changes today. Our shadow report in 2010 gave recommendations to the state I'm very, very proud of, because the state is now working on a unified marriage code. That came out of our work as Masimanyane. We don't have to go around brandishing it, but if you look at our shadow report, those recommendations were in it. And Advocate Kambula, the recent report on the 17th of May this year by the CEDAW committee to our state was our work. It was a work of a coalition of women's groups across the country, but Masimanyane spearheaded it and we submitted that report. It's supposed to be a confidential thing, but the report is out now so they can sue us. If that's necessary. So we've made a seminal contribution to reducing violence against women. We've been part of the Total Shutdown campaign and part of the team under the leadership of people like Advocate Kambule, who developed a new national strategic plan on gender-based violence. And I'm excited about that plan. I talk about it everywhere, not just because I've been part of drafting it, but because it's 25 years of work. And that's the culmination. So that for us is very significant. And now Masimanyane is part of the Provincial Safety Steering Committee in the Eastern Cape. So we worked with the Provincial Safety Steering Committee to develop a provincial plan on gender-based violence based on that national strategic plan. So we're helping to ground that plan at a provincial level. And then we're going to be working, I think the work's already started in Buffalo City, grounding it at a local government level, because that's where it really has to be. But Masimanyane has the Women's Equelo Network, which is 85 organizations of rural women's groups in the province. They are working so hard to get their heads around the national strategic plan and to actually ground that, within the 6 districts. We have 6 district coordinators and 2 metros. They're working to do that, because unless it's owned by communities at the local level, we're not going to see the change we want. In addition to that, I'm on the Gender-Based Violence Fund board, and that's an important initiative as well. But I think the work that we continue to do to ground the NSP, it's also part of Generation Equality, which is a global platform. I'm so excited about that, because it means that this plan is actually getting life. As Advocate Kambula said, you can't legislate for change. change has to happen within communities, within families, within the individuals themselves. And so that generation equality, now we are part of the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, and we've chosen Lusiki as a site for implementing the strategies that generation equality requires to advance gender equality and to reduce gender-based violence. So next week we have, well, in the next few weeks, we've been to Lusiki several times. We've met there with the leadership. We're busy building the capacity because they were only established on the 17th of March this year in response to the minister's report that Lusiki had amongst the highest levels of gender-based violence. And so we are now working on that. So for me, again, this is the principle of Masimanyane, is local to global and global to local. If it doesn't work that way, we're not going to see the change that happens. We build on what people have done in countries like India, in Brazil, and so forth, looking at what they've managed to achieve. So also with the WIN network, I mean, that's an important initiative that we're talking about. And I think, we need to know how best to do that. What do we need to do going forward? I think several people have spoken about the fact that we need to focus more on prevention, because prevention looks at the mechanisms, the educational programs beyond awareness raising. Marching does nothing. Wearing black or orange or purple does nothing. Lighting candles does nothing. What we have to do is really get down into changing communities, person by person, individual by individual, then collectives, working in schools, in tertiary institutions, being able, we have to change the culture in our country of disrespect towards women. That's what has to happen. And a cultural change is difficult, but not impossible. When we were in the CEDAW committee meeting in Geneva, the last few years, the last time South Africa reported, one of the CEDAW committee members said, if South Africa could overcome apartheid, then it can overcome sexism and it can advance gender equality. And that was so simple and clear for me. We can overcome it, but it's going to need prevention, working, as our facilitator, Tamara, said, at a very deep level to understand what those drivers are, and communities and our country to understand that the value women brings to our society is so enormous that everybody benefits, men and women, and it's always seen this zero-sum game that if we give women, or we open up spaces for them, men lose out. That's not true, because women lift up the whole family, community, and society in what they do. So in terms of prevention, the protection mechanisms need to be in place. We've got that through our legislation, but it's not enough. Tamara, I'm about to finish. And then we've got to look at promotion of human rights, prosecution to ensure, investigation, arrests, and so forth, and then punishment to end impunity. So we will only end impunity if we start to use those mechanisms. Thank you, and I'm sorry for running over a bit. I get a bit excited about, I love what I do.
Thank you so much, Lesley-Ann. I love the energy. And I almost wanted to relax to hear this long story, of Masimanyane, but also it links so much to the themes that other speakers raised, the story of our struggle to end violence against women, to use the language, that you were using from Masimanyane. So I think I just want to pick up on, there were a few questions I think that came through, and I want to pick up one of the last comments you made now, Lesley-Ann, around impunity. And I think one of the questions, and I think I think maybe Advocate Kambula, Praise, you can take this question about, how do we respond to impunity? And I think you started picking up on some of the kind of issues, at the broader level. But, what is the response required to really address this issue? Then I think, the issues you were raising now around prevention as well, a question also came through around to Pumla about how we can use universities and curriculum really in the process of really that transformative agenda that you spoke about, are there ideas around how to do that? And I think the others were more remarks, but I also think maybe an issue, just to come back to the theme around justice as well, is the issue relating to secondary victimization and experience of the justice system, and what is in place, and what more can we do to make that experience a different experience, an empowering experience that actually contributes towards prevention as opposed to further victimization. And then I think those were really the comments that I've picked up so far. And then also a lot of celebration of Masimanyane and the work it's done. And so I know that we're moving towards closure in terms of time. But I think that those are some of the areas that we would like our panel to respond to as we close out. So I'm not going to, we're going to use an opportunity almost for each panelist to come back in to pick up maybe on some of the other points that others have made that relates to what you were saying, and also to respond to some of those specific questions. So for those people who have had to shut down across our panel, it's an opportunity to just close off, anything that as you were listening to others as well, because I think these conversations, we feed off each other, don't we, right? We feed off the energy, we feed off the thinking and the ideas emerging. And if people could keep this really to quite a tight period of 2 minutes, closing comments, responding to some of those questions, and anything else you want to say in closing. So let's kick off with you, Pamela. I don't see you now. Okay. Can I move on to you, Pumla? That's okay.
Sure, yes, that's fine, Tam. I think that, thank you very much. I mean, it's just been wonderful listening to all of the colleagues. I think that I could have listened to each one of them for another hour. So that's always a good thing, right? So I wanted to let me just get to the question directly. I think that there's several models that we have to work with throughout the world. I mean, I think that the challenge often with the kind of curriculum based intervention that has to be part of the solution is that you can't force academics to do something that they don't want to teach. And so there's one solution then. There's a range of models. So I'm just going to speak very like in one sentence to two of them that I think I have a lot of time for. So one of them is some universities across the continent and the world, and one university in the South African context has a course that all first years have to take, right? I don't really think that that course you have the capacity to do some really interesting work. It's a year-long course. And it's a model that's been played with by many universities across the world. As I've said, only one in South Africa. I don't necessarily think that the best use of that course is made, right? But there you have an opportunity, because ordinarily people will say, yes, but the people in the humanities and social sciences and law learn about these gender things, but what about arts and physics? But when you do have a course like that, then you have an opportunity, and I think it's a wasted opportunity. I think universities can do a lot of work by doing similar courses and then teaching against patriarchal gender norms in that course in interesting, exciting ways, and doesn't have to be a boring, preachy way. I mean, we're in the business of teaching, so we know how to teach in interesting ways. That's one model. The second model, of course, is that there has to be very specific, sustained ways of keeping gender on the agenda, right? So it's not just about violence against women, which is crucial, which is where the crisis is, but it's about gender has, every time you think, no matter what you're thinking about, in every single committee, if, for example, one of the proposals that we're playing with at an institution where I am, if, for example, every single leader has to have some aspect, however gender intersects with their portfolio, if there's a gender item on every single meeting, then there's a way in which then there's a way in which we are always talking about gender, not only when it becomes a crisis, and we're shifting institutional culture. Just two examples. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'll stop.
Thank you so much, Phumla, for that, and that was very useful. Can I move on to you, Praise, to respond to those justice questions? And can we just keep it very, very short? Thank you. Sorry, you're on mute.
You know, when you talk about impunity, I mean, it's a sore point for everybody, especially us as women, because we have a system that requires that the prosecution to prove the criminal liability and beyond reasonable doubt. So that proof, then it requires evidence. So without us coming forward and participating and supporting the criminal justice system, starting from the investigation to ensure that then we provide that information that is required by prosecution. And if we don't do that, then we will still be having them getting out, because where there is no evidence, then there can be no conviction. And this is something that all of us, we need to know. And then secondly, we also need to know that a person, a victim, has no right to withdraw a charge, all right? A victim can only make a request for the withdrawal of a charge. But we think that if I go to court and then I ask that case to be withdrawn, so it rests with the prosecution. So it's the right of prosecution to withdraw the charge. So we need then to create that environment that is supportive, not only in the court environment, but also even outside. As I said, that we need to choose to challenge whatever system, because this system, the criminal justice system, is made up of us. You know, it is somebody who belongs to your family, who belongs to your community, who is there at the service point. All right. Now, coming into secondary victimization, the question about secondary victimization is that, you know,
one sentence.
Okay, thanks. Secondary victimization cannot end for as long as we do not speak. We don't have dialogues like this, because it's all about an attitude that then translates into a behavior or a communication. So we need to take out the poison by putting in, you know, a nutritious information so as to develop a right attitude that then we can experience at every service point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Praise, for that. And I know that this issue of secondary victimization that you're talking to now there's so much to say around it. Yeah, I'm sorry that we're not having as much time as we would like to have. I just want to give the other two speakers quickly, Pamela, just a moment to make a closing comment, and then I'll end off with Lesley-Ann.
Oh, thank you so much, Tamara. I just want to say thanks to Phumla, or Dr. Lesley and Advocate Praise, and for their input and contribution, and which they raise very, very important points, and whereby I was like, you know what, these are very important, especially Advocate Praise, when she stated the fact that the perpetrators, they the justice in a way that it's kind of taking sides and supporting the perpetrators, because you'll find that when they committed whatever that they committed, and they come up with that arrogancy and confidence facing the victims and telling them that they are not scared of jail. Jail, it's their second home. Those are the things you feel that, oh, you know, we're paying tax, we feed these people, and they've got this arrogance of feeling that, okay, I mean, it's their second home in a way that it's a comfort zone for them. So they see a right to do whatever that they feel they want to do.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much. And thank you, Raj. Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
And over to you, Lesley-Ann.
Thank you very much. Just thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to Mayor Pakati for being here. I believe that this conversations like this, because this is just one of them that we're having, we need to have more of them, because it helps us to think through the ways in which we need to respond and how better we can work together to reduce impunity and to end violence against women. Moving forward, I think we have an exciting time ahead of us as we work around the National Strategic Plan, but this environment also calls for us to work harder, stronger, and more connectedly to end what our young women, what all women actually in the country are facing at the moment. So it's just a word of thanks from me. I'm really, really thrilled that we could share part of our 25-year celebration. We are going to celebrate for the next 12 months. Because we think we deserve it, but that we could have this conversation. I want to thank the listeners, the panelists, the participants, Daily Dispatch and the Herald for everything that they've made possible today. Thank you to Tamara for great facilitation once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Foster.
Sure. Sorry, Mayor Pakati, you want to come in quickly?
No. Just to thank the participants and Masimanyane for hosting this webinar. It was very eye-opening to listen to the presenters. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I think, Lesley-Ann, you've closed us off very well. And just to send love and strength to all of us as we move out into the day and we move into our different spheres of change, and to say thank you to our presenters. You really, and for the energy that we all shared amongst each other. So I think we want to move out of this place with a space, in a mindset of hope and in a mindset of being inspired by the journey of Masimanyane, being inspired by all the contributions that the panelists shared in terms of where they find themselves, and really wanting to make a difference and making the National Strategic Plan a document that's really rooted and making a difference in the lives of women in this country, in the lives of members of the LGBTQIA community, and in the lives of children. So thank you so much. And on that note, we going to close for the morning.